Jake Rodriguez had never been this nervous in his entire life. Standing in the pristine white corridors of Earth's largest space station, he checked his tablet for the 100th time that morning. The words on the screen hadn't changed, but his heart kept racing anyway. Today was the day humans would meet their first alien visitors, and somehow, he was chosen to be their voice. At 32 years old, Jake had spent most of his adult life learning languages. Spanish, French, Japanese, Arabic. He could switch between them like changing radio stations. But this was different. For the past 8 months, he'd been studying something no human had ever learned before. The language of the Zephyrian Empire. The aliens were arriving today for peace talks, and Jake would be the one translating everything they said. No pressure at all, right? He walked down the hall toward the main conference room, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Through the massive windows, he could see their ship, a beautiful silver vessel that looked more like a work of art than a spacecraft. It was shaped like a giant flower, with petals that seemed to shimmer and change color in the starlight. "Jake, there you are," called out Admiral Patricia Williams, the head of Earth's diplomatic team. She was a tough woman in her 50s who had handled some of the most difficult negotiations in human history, but even she looked a little stressed today. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Jake replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I've been practicing their greetings all morning. Did you know they consider it rude to make direct eye contact during the first meeting?" "Just remember," the Admiral said, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, "everything you say today could shape the future of humanity. No pressure." Jake almost laughed. "Thanks. That really helps with the nerves." They entered the conference room together, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The room had been transformed into something that looked like it belonged in a palace. Soft blue lights created a calming atmosphere, and the air smelled faintly of something sweet, like vanilla mixed with ocean breeze. But it wasn't the room that stopped him cold. It was her. Queen Lirelai stood at the far end of the room, and she was nothing like what Jake had imagined. Sure, he'd seen pictures and videos during his training, but seeing her in person was completely different. She was tall, probably 7 feet, with skin that looked like liquid silver. Patterns of light moved across her face and arms like gentle lightning, and her hair seemed to float around her head as if she were underwater. She wore flowing robes that shifted between purple and blue, and when she moved, it was like watching a dancer. Every gesture was graceful and purposeful. But what struck Jake most were her eyes, large, intelligent, and surprisingly kind. "Your Majesty," Admiral Williams said, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Earth's orbital station." The Queen inclined her head regally and spoke in her musical language. Jake cleared his throat and stepped forward. "She says she is honored to be here, and hopes our discussions will bring peace between our worlds," he translated, proud that he'd understood every word. For the next 2 hours, they talked about trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and cultural exchange programs. Jake found himself getting more comfortable with each translation. The Queen spoke slowly and clearly, almost as if she knew he was still learning. During a break in the negotiations, the Earth team huddled together near the coffee station while the Zephyrian delegation moved to the other side of the room. Jake watched as Queen Lirelai gracefully prepared what looked like tea from a beautiful silver pot. "She's not what I expected," whispered Dr. Robert Chen, Earth's chief scientist. "I thought aliens would be more alien." "I know what you mean," Jake replied, still watching the Queen. "She's actually quite elegant. Look how perfectly she pours. That tea, every movement is like art." Admiral Williams nodded. "She certainly carries herself well. Very dignified." Jake found himself studying the Queen's movements more closely. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she handled, the delicate cups, the gentle way she served her advisors. It reminded him of his grandmother, who had always made the perfect cup of tea and insisted on proper manners at the dinner table. Without thinking, Jake chuckled and made what he thought was a casual observation. Looking at the Queen's graceful tea service, he spoke in Zephyrian. "Your Majesty, you would make a sweet wife." The moment the words left his mouth, the entire room went dead silent. Every human stopped talking. Every Zephyrian froze in place. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to get quieter. Queen Lyrelei stood perfectly still, the teacup halfway to her lips. The light patterns on her skin suddenly blazed bright white, pulsing like a heartbeat. For several long seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then, slowly, the Queen set down her cup. She turned to face Jake directly, her luminous eyes meeting his for the first time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent room, everyone heard her perfectly. "I accept." Jake felt the color drain from his face. Around him, he could hear Admiral Williams make a small choking sound. Dr. Chen dropped his coffee cup and it shattered on the floor. "What did you just say?" Admiral Williams hissed in his ear. I said she would make a sweet wife," Jake whispered back, his mouth suddenly dry as sand. "In what tone? What exact words?" Jake's hands began to shake as the horrible truth dawned on him. In his months of studying Zephyrian culture, he'd learned about their formal marriage proposals. There was a specific way to phrase them, a particular grammatical structure that made them legally binding, and he just used that exact structure. On the other side of the room, the Zephyrian advisors were making sounds that could only be described as congratulatory. Some were even applauding in their strange musical way. Queen Lyrelei continued to stare at Jake, waiting for his response to her acceptance. "Oh no," Jake whispered. "Oh no, no, no." "What?" Admiral Williams demanded. "I think," Jake said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think I just accidentally proposed to the Queen of the Zephyrian Empire." And she said yes. The Admiral's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a pale green. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I were," Jake replied, watching as more Zephyrian officials joined what appeared to be an impromptu celebration. "But I think I just got engaged to an alien queen." In all his years of studying languages and cultures, Jake had made plenty of mistakes. He'd once accidentally ordered sheep's brain instead of chicken in Morocco. He'd confused the words for bathroom and kitchen during an important meeting in Tokyo. But this was in a category all by itself. As he watched Queen Lyrelei approach him with what might have been a smile on her alien features, Jake realized his life had just taken a turn he definitely hadn't planned for. The worst part? He still had 4 more days of negotiations ahead of him. This was going to be interesting. The next morning, Jake woke up hoping everything had been a terrible dream. But when he opened his eyes and saw the official Zephyrian engagement contract sitting on his nightstand, reality hit him like a brick wall. He'd barely slept 3 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see Queen Lyrelei's face lighting up with those strange, beautiful patterns when she'd accepted his accidental proposal. The memory made his stomach twist into knots. A sharp knock on his door made him jump. "Jake, emergency meeting in 5 minutes." Admiral Williams's voice carried through the metal walls of his quarters. Jake threw on his uniform and stumbled down the hallway to the main conference room. The entire Earth diplomatic team was already there, looking like they'd been hit by the car, same truck that had run over his life. "Sit down," Admiral Williams said without looking up from her tablet. Her hair was messy, and she had dark circles under her eyes. "We need to talk." Dr. Chen was pacing back and forth behind his chair. "This is a disaster, a complete disaster. Do you know what you've done?" "I made a mistake," Jake said weakly. "A mistake?" Dr. Chen's voice cracked. "You've created an international incident with beings who could wipe us off the map." Admiral Williams held up her hand for silence. "Robert, calm down, yelling won't fix this." She turned to Jake with tired eyes. "But he's not wrong. We spent all night researching Zephyrian marriage customs, and the situation is worse than we thought." Jake felt his heart sink even lower. How much worse? When a Zephyrian queen accepts a formal proposal, it doesn't just create a personal relationship, Admiral Williams explained. It creates a binding diplomatic contract between entire civilizations. Breaking that contract would be considered an act of war. "War?" Jake's voice came out as a squeak. The Zephyrian Empire controls 47 star systems, Dr. Chen added, still pacing. They have technology we can barely understand if we make them angry. Jake put his head in his hands. So what you're saying is I either marry an alien queen or start the first interstellar war in human history. That about sums it up, Admiral Williams said grimly. Before Jake could respond, the door chimed. A soft, musical voice spoke through the intercom. Excuse me, but Queen Lyrelei requests a private meeting with her intended. Everyone in the room turned to stare at Jake. He felt like a deer caught in headlights. Her intended? He whispered. Admiral Williams straightened her uniform. That would be you. Try not to make things worse. Jake walked to the smaller meeting room on shaky legs. Queen Lyrelei was waiting for him, and in the morning light streaming through the station windows, she looked even more otherworldly than before. Today, her robes were a soft golden color that seemed to glow from within. Please sit, she said in English, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her voice had a musical quality that made even simple words sound like poetry. Jake sat down carefully, afraid he might accidentally propose again just by breathing wrong. You seem distressed, Queen Lyrelei observed. This troubles me. Well, Your Majesty, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Jake began carefully. Yesterday, when I spoke to you in Zephyrian, I didn't realize I was using formal proposal language. The light patterns on her skin shifted to a softer blue. I see. So you did not intend to court me? Court you? Jake almost choked. No, Your Majesty. I was just making a casual observation about your grace and elegance. Queen Lyrelei was quiet for a long moment. In our culture, casual observations about suitability for marriage do not exist. When someone uses the formal structure you employed, it indicates serious romantic interest and a desire for political alliance. Jake felt heat rush to his face. I'm so sorry. I've been studying your language for months, but clearly I still have a lot to learn. Do not apologize, the Queen said, and something in her tone made Jake look up. May I share something with you? Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. I have been queen since I was very young, she continued. Every interaction I have ever had has been about politics, treaties, or trade agreements. No one has ever looked at me and seen simply a person who might be pleasant to spend time with. Jake blinked in surprise. Really? Your comment yesterday was the first time anyone suggested I might possess qualities beyond my political value. The patterns on her skin shifted to what Jake was learning might be embarrassment. It was nice. But Your Majesty, surely you've had suitors before? You're beautiful and intelligent and… Jake stopped, realizing he was probably making things worse again. Zephyrian marriages are arranged for political benefit, Queen Lyrelei explained. Romance, as humans understand it, is not part of our culture. But I have been studying your people, and I find your concept of love fascinating. Jake stared at her. You've been studying us? Oh yes. I have read many of your books. Jane Austen is particularly interesting. And Shakespeare. The way humans can form emotional bonds that transcend political necessity. It seems wonderful. It can be, Jake admitted, but it can also be complicated and messy and heartbreaking. Queen Lyrelei leaned forward slightly. But is it not better to feel deeply, even if it sometimes causes pain, than to feel nothing at all? Jake found himself really looking at her, for the first time. Behind the royal bearing and alien features, he could see something very human. Loneliness. You feel trapped by your position, he said quietly. Every day, she admitted. I make decisions that affect billions of lives. I am surrounded by advisors and servants and subjects, but I have never had a friend. Someone who chose to spend time with me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Jake felt his heart do something strange in his chest. That sounds really lonely. It is. Queen Lyrelei's patterns shifted to a deep purple. When you made your accidental proposal, I saw an opportunity. Perhaps I thought this human might come to care for me as a person, not just as a queen. Your Majesty, Jake said gently, I don't want you to think I'm rejecting you personally. Under different circumstances, I think I might really enjoy getting to know you better. But we barely know each other, and the pressure from both our governments. I understand, Queen Lyreley said. But Jake Rodriguez, what if we use this time to simply learn about each other? No pressure, no expectations, just two people from different worlds sharing conversations. Jake felt something shift inside him. Maybe this didn't have to be a complete disaster. I'd like that, he said, and meant it. For the first time since he'd met her, Queen Lyreley smiled, and it was beautiful. Over the next 3 days, Jake found himself spending more and more time with Queen Lyreley. What started as awkward diplomatic meetings slowly turned into something he never expected: actual friendship. Every morning they met in the small observation deck overlooking Earth. Queen Lyreley would bring her strange, sweet-smelling tea, and Jake would bring coffee and whatever breakfast pastry the station kitchen had made that day. Tell me about your childhood, Queen Lyreley asked one morning, watching Earth slowly rotate below them. Jake settled into his chair, surprised by how comfortable these conversations had become. Pretty normal, I guess. I grew up in a small town, in California. My parents ran a restaurant and we had customers from all over the world. That's where I first fell in love with languages. Love with languages, Queen Lyreley repeated thoughtfully. An interesting phrase. You speak of language as if it were a person you care about. In a way it is, Jake said, warming to one of his favorite topics. Every language is like a doorway to understanding how different people see the world. When I learned Spanish, I could suddenly talk to my neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, about her garden. When I learned Japanese, I could appreciate poetry that had no translation in English. Queen Lyreley's patterns shifted to bright gold. What Jake had learned meant she was fascinated. And now you speak mine. Badly, Jake laughed. I'm still making terrible mistakes. Your accent is actually quite good, she said with something that sounded almost like teasing, though perhaps avoid making any more formal declarations until you're certain of the grammar. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. Did you just make a joke? I have been practicing, Queen Lyreley said, and her patterns flickered in what Jake was starting to recognize as amusement. These moments of humor were becoming more frequent. Yesterday, when Jake had accidentally walked into a glass door while distracted by their conversation, Queen Lyreley had laughed, a sound like silver bells that made his chest feel warm. What about you? Jake asked. What was your childhood like? Queen Lyreley's patterns dimmed. Very different from yours. I was chosen as heir when I was 8 years old. From that moment, every day was filled with lessons on leadership, strategy, and diplomacy. I learned 17 different languages, studied the histories of dozens of civilizations, and practiced making decisions that could affect millions of lives. That sounds incredibly lonely, Jake said softly. It was. But it was also necessary. A queen cannot afford to be weak or uncertain. She paused, watching a cloud formation drift across Earth's surface. Though I must admit, I sometimes wondered what it would be like to have friends, to laugh without worrying if it was appropriate, to make mistakes without causing diplomatic incidents. You're laughing now, Jake pointed out. Yes, Queen Lyreley said, and her patterns brightened. It is pleasant. As the days passed, Jake found himself looking. The bubble of happiness Jake had been living in for the past week came crashing down on Thursday morning when Admiral Williams knocked on his door at 6 a.m. We need to talk, she said, her face grim. Both governments are demanding answers. Jake followed her to the secure briefing room where Dr. Chen was already waiting with a stack of official documents and a very serious expression. Sit down, Jake, Admiral Williams said. We've received communications from both Earth Command and the Zephyrian High Council. They want to know your intentions regarding Queen Lyreley. Jake felt his stomach drop. My intentions. The engagement has been official for a week now, Dr. Chen explained. Both sides are asking when you plan to formalize the marriage, or if you're going to dissolve the contract. But I thought we had more time, Jake said weakly. We did. But apparently some news outlets back on Earth got hold of the story. It's all over the internet. Human translator proposes to alien queen is trending on every social media platform. Jake put his head in his hands. Oh no. Oh yes? Admiral Williams said dryly. The president wants to know if we're planning a royal wedding or preparing for war. The Zephyrian Council is asking similar questions. Dr. Chen slid a tablet across the table to Jake. We found something in the Zephyrian legal database. There's a clause that might help us. Jake looked at the screen, trying to focus on the alien text through his panic. What does it say? If both parties can prove they entered the engagement under cosmic influence, basically temporary insanity caused by unusual circumstances, the contract can be dissolved without dishonor to either side. Temporary insanity, Jake repeated. Think about it, Dr. Chen said. You were under extreme stress during the first contact situation. You could argue that the pressure affected your judgment, made you say things you didn't mean. Admiral Williams nodded. It would give both governments a face-saving way out of this situation. You go back to your normal life, Queen Lirelei returns to her empire, and nobody starts a war. Jake stared at the tablet, but his mind wasn't processing the words. All he could think about was Queen Lirelei's laugh, the way her patterns brightened, when she talked about something that excited her, the genuine connection they'd built over the past week. I need to think about this, he said quietly. Don't think too long, Admiral Williams warned. We need an answer by tomorrow. That evening, Jake found Queen Lirelei in their usual spot on the observation deck. She was standing by the window, looking out at the stars, and something in her posture told him she already knew about the legal clause. They told you too, didn't they? He asked, joining her at the window. Yes, she said softly. My advisors believe it would be the wise choice. What do you think? Queen Lirelei was quiet for a long moment. I think, she said finally, that wisdom and happiness are not always the same thing. Jake's heart did that strange jumping thing again. Lirelei, do you know what the worst part is? She continued, still looking out at the stars. For the first time in my life, I found someone who sees me as more than just a political tool. Someone who laughs at my jokes and shares their morning coffee with me and makes me feel like maybe I'm worth knowing as a person. You are worth knowing, Jake said, stepping closer to her. You're amazing. You're brilliant and kind and funny, and any man in the galaxy would be lucky to have you care about him. Queen Lirelei turned to face him, and Jake could see tears. In her large, luminous eyes, apparently aliens could cry too. But not you? She asked quietly. Jake felt like his heart was being torn in two. It's not that simple. There are billions of people depending on us to make the right choice. If we mess this up... I know, Queen Lirelei said. I have been thinking the same thing. Perhaps it would be better if we claimed temporary insanity and ended this before someone gets hurt. Someone's going to get hurt either way, Jake said, and he realized it was true. The thought of going back to his old life, of never seeing Queen Lirelei again, felt like losing something precious he'd never expected to find. Yes, she agreed. But at least if we end it now, only we will be hurt. If we continue and fail, the consequences could affect both our civilizations. They stood there in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Queen Lirelei spoke again. I want you to know that these past days have been the happiest of my life, she said. Whatever you decide, I will not regret the time we spent together. Lirelei, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. What if we didn't have to choose between duty and happiness? What if there was a way to have both? What do you mean? I mean, what if this crazy situation we stumbled into could actually work? What if a human and a Zephyrian queen could build something real together? Queen Lirelei's patterns flared bright with hope. Do you really think it's possible? I don't know, Jake admitted. But I know that I care about you. Not because I have to, not because of politics or treaties, but because you're you. And if there's even a chance we could make this work, it would be difficult, Queen Lirelei warned. We would face criticism from both our peoples. There would be cultural barriers to overcome. political complications to navigate. I know, Jake said, but maybe some things are worth fighting for. Queen Lirelai stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see his reflection in her alien eyes. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Jake took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything. I'm saying that I don't want to claim temporary insanity. I'm saying that maybe my accidental proposal was the best mistake I ever made. The patterns on Queen Lirelai's skin blazed like fireworks, and when she smiled, Jake felt like he could light up the entire space station with the warmth in his chest. Then we face the future together, she said. Together, Jake agreed, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he felt like everything was going to be okay. 6 months later, Jake stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. Today was the day of the most important diplomatic ceremony in human history, and somehow he was still the nervous guy who made terrible mistakes with alien languages. You ready for this? He asked his reflection. His reflection didn't answer, which was probably for the best. A knock on his door interrupted his pre-ceremony panic. Jake, it's time, called Admiral Williams. Jake took one last look in the mirror, straightened his shoulders, and opened the door. Admiral Williams was waiting in the hallway, dressed in her finest uniform and looking almost proud. How are you feeling? She asked as they walked toward the main ceremonial hall. Terrified, Jake admitted. What if I mess up again? What if I accidentally declare war during my vows? Admiral Williams laughed. Jake, you've been practicing those vows for 2 months in 3 different languages. You're going to be fine. But what if? No what ifs, she said firmly. Today is about celebrating something that should have been impossible. You and Queen Lirelai found love in the middle of a diplomatic crisis. If that's not worth celebrating, I don't know what is. They reached the entrance to the ceremonial hall, and Jake could hear the soft music already playing inside. Through the glass doors, he could see hundreds of guests from both Earth and the Zephyrian Empire, all dressed in their finest clothes. Remember, Admiral Williams said, adjusting Jake's tie one final time, this isn't just a wedding. It's the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our civilizations. No pressure. Thanks, Jake said dryly. That really helps with the nerves. The doors opened, and Jake walked into what looked like a fairy tale. The hall had been transformed into something that honored both human and Zephyrian traditions. Flowers, from Earth intertwined with glowing crystals from the Zephyrian homeworld. Soft lights created patterns that moved like gentle waves across the walls, but Jake barely noticed any of it, because at the end of the long aisle, Queen Lirelai was waiting for him. She wore traditional Zephyrian ceremonial robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself, shifting and shimmering with every breath. Her patterns were blazing gold and silver. What Jake had learned meant pure joy, but what took his breath away was her smile. It was radiant and genuine, and meant just for him. As Jake walked down the aisle, he caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd, his parents, who had flown up from Earth and still looked slightly stunned by the whole situation. Dr. Chen, who gave him an encouraging thumbs up. Even some of the Zephyrian officials who had become friends over the past months. But mostly, he focused on Queen Lirelai. With every step, his nervousness melted away, replaced by something much stronger. Absolute certainty that this was exactly where he was supposed to be. When he reached the altar, Queen Lirelai extended her hand to him. Her skin was warm, and the light patterns under her palm pulsed gently against his fingers. Hi, she whispered in English. Hi, yourself, Jake whispered back. The ceremony was beautiful, blending traditions from both worlds. They exchanged vows, in Zephyrian English and the new hybrid language they'd been developing together. Jake managed to get through his part without accidentally proposing to anyone else, which he considered a major victory. The moment that would stick with him forever came when the officiant asked if they would face the future together, supporting each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. I will, Queen Lirelai said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall.